justement, nous accueillons Monsieur Konrad Szczesniak de l'Université de Silesie, qui devait intervenir ce matin, mais avec des difficultés de transport, on a interverti les communications. Donc maintenant, tout va bien. Vous êtes tranquille, vous avez 20 bonnes minutes pour vous exprimer et pour nous parler en anglais, c'est ça? En anglais? Sur le sujet suivant, le titre est le suivant, Diverging Semantic Prosodies of Related Constructions.
Thank you. Don't worry about this title, because the question that I want to ask is rather simple, but very general. So the question that I want to address specifically is, how do people learn the details of grammatical constructions, especially those details that become evident from the usage patterns, from the syntactic frequencies? Or even more generally, how do people learn the syntactic frequencies of grammatical constructions, especially in situations where there is a lot of variability, okay? And so one example that I want to start with is the grammatical construction, leave somebody adjective. And to understand the semantics of the construction, I want you to imagine the context here of this example. So here we have an aspiring author, okay, who has been rejected by publishing houses, okay, countless rejections. But finally, there comes the day when the book is accepted, but this author has no one to share the good news with. And so look at the example here. So after so many rejections, when I finally received the long-awaited letter that a publishing house wanted to see the rest of my manuscript, it left me sad and alone, standing in my home with no one to share my news, okay? So this is the grammatical construction that I want to look at today. So what's interesting about the construction is that it has this fairly standard syntactic pattern. So you have the verb leave, okay, typically in past tense, followed by somebody, followed by a noun phrase, and then adjective, okay? And if we look at the usage patterns, well, this image comes from Google Books Ngrams, which shows the 6 most frequent adjectives. So if we blow up the end of this chart, we see the 6 most frequent adjectives being sad, disappointed, depressed, happy, elated, thrilled, okay? So we have a mix. We have negative, pessimistic adjectives, sad, disappointed, depressed, and then we have happy, elated, thrilled. So there is a predominance of positives, of negatives or pessimistic adjectives over nice, feel-good adjectives. This is, by the way, a case of semantic prosody, which was first pointed out by Sinclair, but perhaps the most popular, the most influential definition comes from Love, who defined it as the consistent aura of meaning with which a form is imbued by its collocates. So to give one example, the phrasal verb set in English, okay, usually follows by, it follows subjects that are very consistently negative. So you can say rot set in, or decay set in, malaise, despair, ill will, decadence, impoverishment, infection set in. So there is no there are no good examples of sentences with pleasant subjects that take the phrase set in. So you can't say something like enthusiasm set in unless you are sarcastic. Or the difference between enduring and persistent. So enduring both mean pretty much the same thing, continuing, right? So if something continues over a long period of time, you can either say enduring or persistent, but there is a difference in that enduring is followed by nouns that are positive. So you can have enduring values, enduring friendship, traditions, legacy, partnership, commitment. And on the other hand, persistent typically precedes things like pain, cough, problem, inflation, threat, poverty. Okay, so there is a, so we can see that enduring, we can imagine enduring as if it's surrounded by this very warm aura of positive meaning, whereas persistent is surrounded by this negativity. Now, in the case of the construction that I'm interested in, the semantic prosodies are not very clear. All right, so they are both positive and negative at the same time, but there is a strong bias toward negativity, okay? Now, this negativity does not come from the verb feel, because if you look at feel, it goes with happy and sad pretty much equally frequently. So you have feel happy is more frequent than feel sad, but then felt sad is frequent than felt happy. So you know, feel, let's say, is more flexible. Okay, it comes both with positive and negative adjectives more or less equally frequently. Now, the tendency toward negativity is even stronger if we add left me feeling very, because then pretty much all the adjectives are negative. So left me feeling very uneasy, alone, uncomfortable, low, vulnerable, sad, then lonely, depressed, and frustrated. So here there is less variation. Here there is more emphasis on negativity. Maybe I'll skip the issue of how foreigner learners use the construction. But here, these are just snapshots from the International Corpus of Learner English. So these sentences come from passages written by students of English who are not native speakers of English. Okay, so European students coming from Germany, France, Poland, etc. So this corpus, basically, what we see is that students also use this construction more often with negative adjectives. So it appears that foreigner learners of English are also familiar with this bias toward negativity, okay? Or at least unconsciously they sense that there is something negative about this construction and they use it accordingly. Now, interestingly, the Portuguese language also has an equivalent of this construction. So we can say sentences like a experiência deixou-me muito. Now, you can say feliz or entusiasmado, but a glance at the corpus of Portuguese shows you that a lot more often what you get are adjectives such as triste, irritado, confuso, okay? So it's flexible, there is variation, but a lot more you're a lot more likely to find this construction with negative adjectives rather than positive adjectives. So the question is, how is that preference developed, both in L1 and in L2? We know that according to construction grammar accounts, to usage-based accounts of learning, our knowledge of grammatical construction of grammatical constructions comes from our experiences, right? With multiple exposures to instances of how the construction is used, of which there can be, well, at least hundreds, sometimes thousands of experiences with a construction in actual usage, right? And so based on these experiences, learners discover a pattern, okay? So we discover a pattern in the case of leave somebody adjective, subconsciously or maybe consciously, we discover that there is a preference that that this construction has for negativity rather than positivity. So how does that how do people learn these preferences? Now, yeah, and the question I'm asking is, does this happen with or without conscious attention? And this is an important question because in light of a pretty influential hypothesis called the noticing hypothesis, we learn, at least in the case of foreign learners, okay, we can't learn new things if we don't pay close attention to form. This is at least what Richard Schmidt claims in the noticing hypothesis, which he first formulated in 1990, but in subsequent publications until the year 2010, he pretty much sticks to the original idea, which basically says that if we want to learn a language form, we have to pay attention, which this, by the way, this is pretty reasonable and in theory, rather uncontroversial. Of course, we have to pay attention. If we don't pay attention, how can we learn anything? But his claim is more specific, more dramatic, I would say, because he says we don't just pay attention to the meaning itself, but we have to also focus, or he uses the expression focal awareness. We have to exercise focal awareness, meaning we have to photographically notice the form of the expression, okay? Now, question, how does, you know, if you have individual words which you're not familiar with, they will stand out and you will notice them because they're novel. And thanks to their novelty, they're salient. So yeah, it's very easy to learn them. But syntactic patterns are more challenging because they don't look novel. They don't catch our eye through novelty. They're not naturally or inherently salient. So how then do foreign learners or native speakers notice, okay, the form of expressions that don't look inherently or naturally salient? Well, Schmidt says, well, they just do. People do notice them because there is no other way of learning language forms. Oh, by the way, he's not alone in this claim. In usage-based theories, when it comes to usage-based theories, Nick Ellis wholeheartedly supports, or he subscribes to Schmidt's hypothesis. He says, yeah, well, conscious awareness is key. It's crucial. So there is no other way. The problem is that if you're exposed to a grammatical construction hundreds or thousands of times, how plausible is it that every single time we will pay attention, or we will pay close attention to the surface form? And oops, how did uh-oh, I don't know what this, okay. Anyway, so I decided to investigate this question more closely, but by looking at a similar situation, okay, but so I ran 2 batches of tests at 2 universities, both in Poland and in the Czech Republic. And the thing that I focused on was the acquisition or the knowledge, let's say, I think it's more accurate if I say the knowledge of irreversible binomials in foreign learners of English, Polish and Czech. So irreversible binomials are expressions such as the ones that are listed here: black and white, yes or no, mom and pop, salt and pepper. So what's interesting about these binomials is that, well, they're irreversible, meaning one sequence, one ordering is a lot more frequent than the other. So it's more natural and more more natural and more frequent than white and black. People don't say no or yes. 99% of the time, we say yes or no. Mom and pop rather than pop and mom. Salt and pepper, pepper and salt. Now, pepper and salt is not ungrammatical. They're it is possible to find instances of pepper and salt, but they're a lot less frequent than salt and pepper. Now, again, if you look at the frequencies of these irreversible binomial forms, especially the predominant form, they tend to range between 90 and 100%, 99% versus the less infrequent forms. So, for example, if you have black and white, look at the corpus. Depending on the corpus, the frequency is around 95%. Versus 5% for white and black, okay? And yes or no, I think it's closer to 99%. But then again, how do people learn the correct frequencies? How do people discover that, you know, one ordering is more frequent or more natural than the other? Again, I want to stress the fact that the ordering itself is very inconspicuous. It's very unlikely that anybody would, you know, read a book and notice an expression such as black and white and think to him or herself, oh, interesting, black and white. I'll just write down this expression because it's new. I doubt anybody does this, okay, in real life. Now, so this is a very complicated table, but what this shows is a collection of 17 irreversible binomials. 13 are real binomials, the first 13, okay? And the last 4 are binomials which I invented, okay? So the things like beer and wine, you can just say beer or wine or beer. Now, the first column shows correct answers in my Czech students. The second column shows the correct percentages in my in the group of Polish students, and then the last column shows the cumulative percentages for both groups. Now, here's the degree of how well they match the frequencies of these binomials in 4 corpora: COCA, News on the Web, then iWeb, and the BNC corpus. And so you can see that that when it comes to binomials such as sooner or later, yes or no, the match is very good. But on the other hand, if you look at the bottom of the table, beer or wine, most of the last 4 binomials are used in the corpora. Okay, so they exist, they are visible in the corpora, but because they're not established, their frequencies are very close to 50%. So whether you say beer or wine or beer, it doesn't make any real difference. And what's funny is that those percentages are also found in the results of the experiment, right? Now, in the second part of the experiment, what I did was I presented sentences to my students. Sentences such as, look at the first one: despite their husband and wife status, their frequent fights were only the tip of an iceberg of trouble brewing in their home. And I asked my students, so on each sheet that I distributed to my students, I asked the students, underline those phrases which you think are fixed formulaic phrases, or those phrases which you think are worth knowing, okay? So, as you can guess, most students would underline things like tip of an iceberg, right? Or in the second sentence, they would underline the last expression, beating around the bush. Hardly anybody underlined things like yes or no, or mom and pop, or black and white, okay? There were a few students who did, okay? But for the most part, I don't have a slide with the exact percentages, but the binomials were underlined 54 times, okay? And 54 times out of 550 total, okay? So there were 550 underlines overall, of which only 10% were irreversible binomials. What this means is that a lot of the students, most of the students, did not underline a single irreversible binomial. What this, what I want to the case that I'm trying to make here is this. Students do know these expressions, okay, because the percentages that you see here in the first column show that they match very closely the percentages of usage by native speakers, okay? But the results of the second part of the experiment show that they're pretty much blind to these expressions when they're used in the text, in the input, okay? They are, well, I'm using the word blind metaphorically, but what I'm trying to say is that, you know, when you read the input, when you read a book, for example, or when you listen to someone talking, or when you're in the middle of watching a Netflix movie, you don't normally do a double take and think, huh, interesting expression, yes or no, because they are not salient, okay? They escape our attention. So the takeaways, the conclusions that all these data lead to are as follows. Well, on the one hand, under the noticing hypothesis, conscious attention to form is needed for learning. I mean, it's required. Without, according to Schmidt, without conscious attention to form, okay, you can't learn these things. But this rules out the retention of information perceived subliminally, okay? So according to Schmidt, there is no such thing as subliminal automatic implicit learning. You really have to consciously notice things. But the problem with this idea is that the input contains a lot more information that is non-salient, and it's very unlikely that we notice every single case of a construction being used to mobilize our conscious attention. And in the experiment that I just reported, participants demonstrated knowledge of those phrases that I say others failed to notice, but I say others because in the two parts of the experiment, I used different students to avoid priming effects. But we can say that foreign learners of English know expressions that they fail to notice in the input, okay? And so the best conclusion that I can think of is that much of the input has to be learned subliminally without conscious awareness to notice. By the way, you know, the second, the experiment that I just reported here has been accepted for publication in the journal Acta Psychologica. So it should be out in the summer of this year. I'm not sure if, okay, I'm done. I'm not sure if I did a good job selling my claim that most of our encounters with uses of grammatical constructions are unconscious, but I'm open to questions and criticism. Thank you very much. Okay.